Welcome back to the Surviving Siblings podcast. Today I have, of course, another surviving sibling with me, and her name is Angie. Angie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about your story, Angie, because it's unique. I've never told a story about this kind of loss before with a sibling, but you've also experienced a lot of loss in your life. So I think a lot of our listeners and watchers will connect with your story. So to kind of take us to maybe the beginning, or to paint the beautiful image of your brother Seth that you tragically lost, can you tell us a little bit about Seth, your brother, and your relationship, and a little bit about your family background?
Yeah, for sure. So my brother Seth was 6 years younger than me. So kind of our family dynamic was my sister was 3 years older than me. So my sister Marcy, and then there was me. And then Seth came along and he was 6 years younger. And so just growing up, Seth was he was just a funny kid. He loved everything sports. You know, his favorite was Bo Jackson, Michael Jordan. He loved just collecting all the baseball cards. And we grew up in a very small town in Nebraska, and he was just kind of a quiet kid, you know, and he just grew to be very tall. My brother was 6'5". Wow. And I think it was I was about 18. It was right after I had graduated high school. My parents divorced. And so my brother would have then been about 12. And so, you know, my parents divorced. So then Seth was kind of going back and forth. I had graduated high school. My sister was already out of the house, right? And so Seth was going back and forth to my parents' house. And, he kind of had a different lifestyle. And then I ended up moving out and, started to build my life. And then, so my sister and I we kind of missed a lot of his childhood, high school, like being right there, then and there, because we were a little bit older than he was. And then my mom and dad, they had both remarried. And within it, my mom had another child, my brother Nathan, so my half brother Nathan, and he's actually 20 years younger than me. So, it's one of those family dynamics. And then when my dad remarried, his wife had other children. So then there were other people, coming in and being involved. So yeah, nothing extraordinary. Seth was just such a quiet young kid. And he really played video games, and he just loved life. He was not a tough kid at all.
Yeah. He kind of had like the younger child vibe is kind of what I feel for him. And I relate because it's me, and then I have a sister, and then it was my brother. So my brother was the third in our family too. So I can connect with that. But I think it's interesting that, basically both of you and your sister, you guys were out of the house. I mean, you had moved on. And so you stole the thoughts right out of my head as I was listening to you. He's living this very different life than you guys. There's two different homes. There's two different, places to go. And then there's a yours, mine, and ours child situation. So it's a different dynamic. Definitely.
Yes. And it was, I think I don't know why, and I'm not a very controlling person, but I know that afterwards, after my parents got divorced, I kind of took on a little bit of a motherly role towards my brother, Seth. And when he graduated, so my parents, when they did divorce, they did not get along. So there was that dynamic as well, and it was hard for, gatherings and things like that. So when Seth graduated high school, then I was married to my husband, Jack. And at that time, and then, my parents couldn't decide, well, who's going to have the graduation party, for example. And so, I took it upon myself. Jack and I will have your graduation party. So we hosted it. So I was like, I'm going to take care of my brother this way. And, that kind of continued on as the future grew. I would do the things that I think my parents did just because they didn't know how to do that stuff together.
Right. Yeah, another thing I can deeply relate to you on, Angie. And I think it is something that happens with the older children when there's younger. You know, I have a 10-year age gap between my youngest sister and I, and I definitely did a lot of those things for her as well. And I think especially when your parents are divorced, because she kind of had a different life than us too, the three of us, and then her.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we're whole siblings, there was just an age gap, and that's really, it creates a different dynamic, and you do become like mini mom, as I like to call it.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So you and Seth obviously had a great relationship. Tell us a little bit about, as we're leading up to, like, what his life was like as we're leading up to his diagnosis, because today we are talking about brain cancer, and this is something I've never talked about on the show before. And I think sharing different types of loss on this show is so important. So again, thanks for sharing this with us. And I'm curious to kind of learn about Seth as an adult and kind of what things were like. And then obviously we'll go into his diagnosis and, you know, his battle with cancer.
Yeah, I'm always ready to share and make awareness known around any cancer diagnosis, but brain cancer for sure. So Seth actually, he went to college and he was living, he did like the 6 to 7 year college plan, I think it was, but so after he graduated, my husband Jack and I, we lived on a farm, and we were not farmers by any means, but we lived on his family farm. And it was his grandparents, and so within this farm, there was a small little house. And so after my brother had graduated college, and just to get on his feet and get going in life, he moved into the little house because the little house was empty. So we had the big house, he had the little house, and so. You know, Seth was working at a bicycle shop, and Bike Masters here in Nebraska. And so he was just, trying to find his way. You know, he was not dating anyone at the time. He started kind of talking to a girl after he graduated college. And so, this is when it kind of all began. You know, he moved in August of what would it have been, 2004. He moved into the little house, and it was wonderful having Seth there. You know, we had my daughter Gracie. She was probably about 2-ish at the time, and he would always just come over, and we would have dinner together. He would come over. We would play video games together, like Guitar Hero. We just love stuff like that. So, and he worked hard, you know, and you know, it leads us up to, you know, his diagnosis. You know, I remember exactly when it was. It was October 14th, 2004. My husband, Jack, and I were walking into a wedding reception, and Jack had received a phone call, and he's like, you just go ahead and go in, and I will take this call real quick. So I went in there, and he comes in, and he's like, we need to go. And I said, okay. And he's like, Seth had a grand mal seizure at work. And we received the phone call from one of Seth's best friends that he worked with. And then also, this guy, Ryan, was one of Seth's best friends that he had went to high school and school with. And as well, my husband, Jack, was on the volunteer fire department in our community. And so Ryan was also on the volunteer fire department with Jack. So, you know, there's a lot of dynamic, you know, things in the mix there. But so we left. He said, I don't know what's going on. Ryan just said he found Seth having a grand mal seizure at work. You know, Seth had never had any issues prior to this of anything. And so we went, you know, and as we went along the way, I didn't know if I should call my parents. I didn't know. And, you know, this was 2004. And so, you know, cell phones weren't like, everyone didn't have them, you know, like they did before.
Right.
Most people had, like, Jack had one, but like my parents didn't have them. So I didn't know if I should call them or just wait till we get to the hospital. So we waited. So we got there, and I was like, okay, well, I better call my parents, you know, and luckily I caught both of them at home. And I can't remember exactly if my mom had made it there by then. I think she had. And the doctors came in and they said, well, we know exactly what has caused this seizure. And he's like, you have a brain tumor. And I just remember like thinking to myself, what, like I had never at that moment really known anyone, and I didn't know, I mean, you hear brain tumor and you hear everything is just, that's just not good,
Right.
So
Right.
it was pretty just startling and traumatic at that moment for us, and then my dad finally got there, and really the goal and the steps going forward for the next hours to the next few days were just to get Seth's seizures under control and then go from there.
So Angie, explain to us what that type of seizure is, because I've had friends or I've known people that experience seizures, but I don't know a whole lot about it. And so I think that'd be really informative. Can you explain the type of seizure that he had so we understand?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So a grand mal seizure is when your whole body, so the tumor was pushing on a part of his nervous system. So it basically, your whole body convulses, and your eyes are rolling back in your head, and you're very rigid, and your muscles are tight, and so the first thing a person should do if you see that is ever roll a person on their side so they don't choke on their tongue. So it's very, grand mal seizures are not as common as just like mini seizures. Seth would have mini seizures throughout the time as well.
I feel like that's what is portrayed often in like movies, right? Where it's like the extreme, where you're, lay them on, this is, we taught this in school too. Like if this happens to anyone, lay them on their side. They used to tell us like put a pencil in their mouth or something. Like, yeah. Right. So like it was interesting because I've never really known anybody that has those types of seizures. So thanks for sharing that with us. But when like in school I knew some kids that had seizures. It was more like what you were describing when it was the more minor ones where they kind of just stop and it's like overwhelming. But I think this is something we definitely should bring awareness to, of course. And I wanted to ask you something as well. Prior to this, like he's just a normal kid out of college, figuring out life like all of us do after college. And there was nothing. There was no indication prior to this. He just had this major seizure. And then I'm assuming they did scans and everything in the hospital. And this is how they found out that he has this tumor.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you feeling lost in your grief journey? Perhaps even stuck? As a surviving sibling, I too have felt lost, stuck, confused, angry. Well, fill in the blank. I've felt so many emotions along my grief journey. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about too. Along the way, I found that what I needed was answers to all of my unanswered questions, validation, permission to feel everything that I was feeling at different times, and ultimately, I needed guidance. That's why I created the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. This is a 23-page guide that guides you, the surviving sibling, along your grief journey, written and created by a surviving sibling for surviving siblings. Click the link in the show notes to get your copy or visit thesurvivingsiblings.com, where you can also find more show information, merchandise for surviving siblings like you, and more resources and support.
So yeah, he had an MRI, well, initially just a CAT scan, in the ER, and that's where they saw the tumor. And so, of course, this led to the, going forward that we don't know what this is for sure. You're going to have an MRI. And, it just kind of moved slowly, but quickly, I guess you could say. In the cancer world, everything is like, hurry up and wait all the time. So, we didn't know what type of tumor it was. We didn't know anything. But again, that was just kind of one of the roles where my parents, I was kind of surprised by this, but they both kind of left the hospital that night. And I remember looking at my husband, Jack, and I was just like, wait, Seth is all alone. Like, he can't stay here alone. And so I said, and I think at the same time, Jack and I kind of were like, yeah, no, we gotta, you'll stay here. And I was dressed, and dressed clothes still from the wedding reception. Jack's like, I will go home and get you some comfy clothes, bring him back to the hospital, and then I ended up staying with Seth. And then he was in the hospital for about a week until they got his seizures under control. And then I went and picked him up from the hospital, and he came home with us, and he stayed with us. And, because I was just kind of like that scared mama figure that I was like, oh my goodness, and so then, then just moving forward, it was just meeting with his primary doctor. And one of the things too at this point was Seth did not have health insurance. So our battle with that was also big, and being in an ER and everything. And we knew this mountain that we were going to have to climb was going to be financially extremely burdensome for Seth. And so we did everything we could, as a family unit. We did fundraisers. I worked endlessly with everybody at the hospital, like the social workers, the care teams, the financial teams, just to try to get everything lessened for him, his financial bills. And I will tell everybody, if you're ever in this position, fight for financial freedom for your loved one, because there are so many programs within the hospital that they don't tell you outright. You have to ask and you have to dig for those. So it was very helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, Angie. Yeah, I can't even imagine going through that, because, we all know, being healthy, knock on wood, individuals having healthcare either through your employer or if you're self-employed, and like, it's expensive just to have it. And so there's a lot of us out here who don't have health insurance. And then if something like this happens, I love your advice though, just to fight. And of course they're not going to be like, sure, let's offer a solution for you, because why would we do that? Right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
right.
Frustrating. And I mean, just out of the gate, he's in the hospital for a week. And like you said, you knew you had a mountain like Mount Everest to climb. So, as you guys he's coming home, as you guys are going through this experience, what did you start to find out? You said it very well earlier. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. And when did you guys start to understand the diagnosis, or did they give you information? Like, was he going to recover? Was he not going to recover? How did this happen? Like, all of those questions that so many of, I'm sure you guys have in your own story, but of course in your story as well.
Yeah, we really just, it went, like I said, a hurry up and wait. It actually went fairly quickly in Seth's case. They knew that this tumor was creating an issue, obviously. And so they did an MRI, they mapped it out. He had surgery, brain surgery, which they call a craniotomy. He had that the end of August. And so remember, this had happened initially August 14th. At the end of August, he had his craniotomy, his first craniotomy. And what that entailed was they cut you from ear to ear, like a little rainbow over your head. And they took out his brain tumor. And so at that time, while he's still open, actually, they actually test that just to see what kind of cancer it is, if it is cancer, if it's benign. And his was cancer. It was an astrocytoma, and there's so many different types of brain tumors out there. Seth's was graded, they grade them in brain tumors, whereas like a lot of cancers are stages. Seth's was graded as a grade 1. Brain tumors are graded. And so at this point in time, they were kind of just like, well, we don't have to do chemo radiation. We think we pretty much got it all. And he recovered extremely well. I mean, he had 30 to 45 staples across his head. He came home within a few days. I mean, Seth was an exercise guy, and he ate very healthy anyways. So this was not, for his recovery, I think that was very helpful. So, life just went on. And then, at this time, he is basically, he's started dating a gal. We become pregnant with my son. Life is just moving along. Seth is not having seizures anymore. He's not having problems. It was almost just kind of like this blip on our radar, right? And, then, fast forward a little bit, 2005, we became pregnant. We had our son Garrett in 2005, and everything was still going good. Then my brother he met his wife and they were dating heavily. They were still living on the farm in the little house. And then we had Garrett, our son, and like I said, in 2005. And then, unfortunately, our son Garrett died in 2006. And so that was a very traumatic time for our family. Obviously, my son was 1 year old when he died.
And how did you lose your son, Angie? I think that's, again, this is a big part of your story is, yes, you lost your brother and this was a lot, but you have a lot of losses. It's a multi-loss story for sure. And so how did you lose your son? How did he pass?
Our son Garrett died in his sleep. He was 1 year old, and what we had come to find out is that he had a rare heart defect that we did not know he had. And it's basically, it's a very long name. It's like ectopic origin of the right coronary artery. Basically, his right coronary artery was kinked. And, you don't know a child or a person would have this unless, because it always causes sudden death. And sudden death happens either in extreme rest or extreme activity. And Garrett was sleeping. So, so that was probably, our daughter was 4 then at the time. And like I said, we were just really trying to survive life. We had Seth's cancer diagnosis. We felt like, okay, we made it through that, right? We have a past of having bad things happen to us. Well, that is not how it goes. And then Garrett dies. And then, after 1 year, so in 2007, the fall of 2007, we had survived the 1 year of our son being gone. And it was very hard. But then September, my brother and his wife, Joey, they got married. And so that was amazing. And then right after they got married, Seth started having issues again. Started having major headaches, just some issues like that. And so he went and got an MRI again, and sure enough, the brain tumor had grown back. And so this was just weeks after he got married. So we were just like, what, and again, it was the end of September. They went in, they did brain surgery again, another craniotomy for Seth. And again, the same thing. They tested his tissue for everything. It came back as a grade 1, same as before. This did not warrant chemo or radiation or anything. They don't start really wanting you to do any of that unless it comes back as a grade 3 or 4. And so he was a grade 1 again. And we thought, okay, so same thing. Stitches, he recovered fairly well. It's a little bit slower this time. And he had his wife, Joey, with them. They were still living on the farm with us in the little house. And, she took wonderful care of him. And, and it was good because of everything that we had gone through with our son. I didn't feel the pressure of being there for my brother as much,
Yeah.
But we were constantly together, and, and like I said before, things don't stop at just 1, 2, 3. When Seth and Joey got married, my husband Jack was having some issues with his eye. and just, not feeling the best. And in the end of October there, that same year, 2007, my husband Jack was diagnosed with cancer. He was diagnosed with ocular melanoma. So he had a tumor in his eye. And
wow.
Again, this was the biggest punch, because I was just like, we survived living without our son for
Right.
1 year. We have fought endlessly for my brother to survive and live. And now this, I was pissed. I was heartbroken. And and again, my daughter is now, Gracie's 5 at the time. And I'm just like, how much more can we take? Well, unfortunately, Jack's cancer did not, his was pretty bad. His was stage 4 terminal cancer. His had spread throughout his body, and it had spread to his brain. So again, we were fighting with somebody that had brain tumors, but his were different. His were metastasized from his ocular melanoma. So Jack ended up having to do full brain radiation and chemo. And, during this whole time, I think Seth was just kind of like, how did I get so lucky? How am I just still this and this, and I know he struggled with that just a little bit, but
Right, watching your husband, he was like me. What a beautiful brother. Yeah.
Yeah. It really was. And he just did everything he could to learn and to help take care of things along the acreage and all that. And Jack ended up battling for 16 months. So he was diagnosed at the end of October 2007, and he lost his battle with cancer it'll actually be February 8th, 2009. So coming up this week, as we record. So he's been gone. It'll be 15 years this coming Thursday that he's
big
been
year.
gone.
Wow, Angie. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. So after Jack died, I've told this story many of times, but Seth and Joey, they took Gracie and I, my daughter, they drove us to the funeral for Jack's funeral, and we were leaving the church, and I just remember Seth was in the front seat driving and Joey was in the passenger seat, and Gracie and I were in the back seat. And he just turned around and looked at me and said, "It's okay, sissy." He's like, "I'm here. I'm going to take care of you. It's going to be okay." And I remember him. I vividly see his face looking at me, and, and I felt this peace, like, it's going to be okay, Angie. It's going to be okay,
You don't know
And
how, you don't know when, you don't know what, but like those people in your life, which, that's why we talk about siblings here, they have that power over us. I think that's really beautiful. It's like, I don't even know what your brother looks like, but I can like imagine him looking at you like that. I can feel that. I know what that's like. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just, it was all just hard, I still don't have exact words for it, but then, we move forward. February 8th is when Jack died. We get through February, and then in the beginning of March-ish, Seth started having issues again. And he kind of kept it very quiet from some of us because of just everything that had transpired with Jack dying and with Garrett dying. And it was just, but anyways, his tumor grew back. He did an MRI, his tumor grew back. So Seth had his third craniotomy on March 13th of 2009. And this time it came back with a vengeance a little bit. So he was going to need chemo and radiation. So they removed what they could from the tumor. And then at that time, his wife and Joey, they were still living on the farm, but then they stayed at her parents' house while Seth recovered, just because they were closer to the hospital. Joey needed just some help with them because Seth did not bounce back as quickly this time, because the tumor was stronger and bigger, I guess. And So they did not come back. And then it was about April 4th. Seth had another grand mal seizure. And this ultimately put him into a coma. And after doing the MRI, they said that even after the surgery that he had just short of a month ago, the tumor had just tripled in size and came back crazily. So Seth, we knew that Seth's time was going to be very short with us, and he ended up losing his cancer battle after battling it for 5 years on April 7th, 2009. So exactly 2 months after my husband had died.
That's a lot. That's a lot, Angie. Yeah.
It is a lot. It is a lot, and at this point in time, I had lost hope in everything, and I didn't know where to turn. I couldn't turn to my family. None of us could. I mean, we had all collectively lost somebody. Like my parents had lost a son. I had lost a sibling. My siblings had lost siblings, but then they had just lost their brother-in-law and their nephew. I mean, my parents had lost their grandson, their son-in-law. I mean, we were all grieving the same people, but in different forms. And we couldn't turn to each other for comfort. And I was so alone, because I had friends. I did. But even my friends, they've said, we had no clue what to do. We had no clue what to do for you or your family. And I think as a community, nobody did.
If you haven't been through it, as we always say, right, it's very difficult to understand it. And your story is filled with, unfortunately, so much loss, Angie, but it's an interesting story too, because it's like you guys had these really high highs, and then it was followed by these, I assume it would just be completely jarring, to go through that, because, you have a wedding and then this happens, and then you have, this moment and then this happens, and you think your brother's like, okay, I feel good, he's going to be here, and then he's gone 2 months later. Like, that is a lot to go through. And so when you were saying earlier that you were just angry and, of course you were. Of course. I mean, all of the majority of the people that were in your immediate life were taken from you in such a short period of time.
Yep, they were gone.
It's you and Gracie
they were gone,
against the world, essentially, at that point.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I was just like, and I'm just trying to survive, but I will say, the biggest thing was my daughter, Gracie. She was the one that made me get up every day, because I had promised from the get-go that I was not going to let her or have her live this crappy life. I had choices. We all have choices. And I tell everybody that we have choices. We can either choose to be a crappy parent and not be there, not show up, lay in bed all day and do the woe is me party. Or B, we can get up and we can just put on our big girl pants and try as hard as we can. Will we be perfect? Absolutely not. Will we make mistakes? Always, but we have the choice to show up, and I chose to show up, and I'm so thankful I did, because my daughter's beautiful and she's graduating from college this year. So, I mean, look how far we've come, and it's never been easy, never in a million years. And the time it's taken to get to where we are today has been just extraordinary, really. I don't know.
I mean, how else could you describe it? I mean, that's so intense. I'm sure your bond with your daughter is quite intense, though, because going through so much loss together and going through so much together, I can't imagine that it doesn't bond you. And I often say on the show, and it's so interesting because everybody that comes on, it's like it either tears you apart or it brings you together, because it's kind of you guys against the world.
Exactly. And I've always, I feel like even with my other siblings, we've all kind of, I feel like we've done really well just being there for each other, but the bond, like you said, is just, it's there with, Gracie. And then like with my nieces and my nephew, everybody has just a little bit closer relationship. And, we all just remember and laugh about Seth and about Jack, and, and Garrett was so little, but, he didn't get a full life. He got 1 year of life, but, we talk and honor these boys like no other,
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I really love what you said too about showing up, because it's really amazing in our group, on TikTok, on lives, wherever, the moms, that are like, I just lost my brother, I just lost my sister, I just lost multiple people like you, Angie. And they're like, if it wasn't for my daughter, if it wasn't for my son, if it wasn't for my kids. And I think it is a choice. Like you said, it is a choice. And it doesn't mean that, I think sometimes when people hear this, so don't misunderstand me on this, guys, but they think, oh, that just means I have to be strong and not show emotion. And it doesn't mean that at all. You can still break down. You can still cry. You can still have a really bad day. And there's probably going to be a lot of them. And that's okay. But are you going to choose to show up for the people that are still here with you? And I think that's a really powerful message that you have in your story. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look perfect. You don't have to be perfect, but what's perfect is you showing up every day. Like, that's the beauty of it. And it's not easy, but I think there is kind of a strength and a deep bond that can happen with people when you are there for them through those times.
No, for sure. For sure. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah. I mean, the showing up, I mean, I would have never wanted to miss the chance of seeing the hard, the ugly, and the bad, because then you don't get to see the beauty, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think what's also really fascinating about your story, Angie, is that all three of these significant losses that you've had, they're all so specific. Like, do you feel like you're a doctor at this point? Like, I'm like blown away by your, I always like to bring a little levity to every episode, because these are very deep, intense, stories and conversations. But I'm like blown away by the knowledge that you have from your brother to your husbands to your own child, Garrett. Like, that is like, did you feel like you were becoming a doctor were you just researching WebMDing like crazy? What was your life like during all of that?
Well, yes, I definitely was. Yes. We were given just the opinion from the doctors, do not Google anything. But me, of course, I Google everything.
Who follows that? No.
I know. But yeah, so I mean, I've learned a lot, and it's helped me. It's helped me help family and friends along the journey, because I'm not an expert by any means. I mean, I am a grief expert, not because I took classes and became one. I lived the grief. I'm living the grief journey, and so I am a grief expert. But I also, I became very knowledgeable and stuff. So that's helped me to be able to volunteer in certain, like in the brain tumor world, like for fundraisers and different things. I've learned, like it's February's Heart Month, right? My son died of a heart condition. So how can I help people understand heart, so what we did is we started this before Jack had died, actually. He wanted to give back. So we would raise money through golf outings. And we have placed 13 AED machines, which are automatic electronic defibrillators, throughout our community. So within, a few years, we were able to give back to our community. An AED machine would have never saved Garrett's life, but it was something small that we could to help other people if they would ever, have a sudden cardiac, situation. So that's what we do. That's what I've done. I've poured my knowledge of what I've learned from my people and the symptoms, and even Gracie. I mean, she says she's a doctor now. She's watched Grey's Anatomy at least 5-6 times over fully. So she's like, Mom, I'm basically a doctor.
I love it.
Yeah.
No, I think that, thank you for sharing that you guys went and did that and got those, because I think that's something that I hear all the time people ask me all the time, like, what do I do? What do I do for an anniversary? What do I do to remember my sibling? What do I do to remember my loved one? That's a big question. And I always tell them, I'm like, what feels right to you? What feels good? Like, what's going to make you feel like, for Garrett, you guys wanted to get these machines that wouldn't have been accessible, and no, might not have saved him, but it could save someone else. And I like feel warm inside, just like, you know, retelling that part of your story, because I connect with that. And I think that is such an important thing, because a lot of people want to know, like, what can I do? And some people are like, why should I do a podcast too? Or should I write a book? Or it's not one size fits all. It's how are you going to express that love that you still have? And how do you feel like you can make a difference? And it can be something really small and simple, like remembering them every year, doing a simple thing like that. Or you can do something really cool like you did and give back to the community and make a difference and make a change. Because I think all of us show and want to get our grief and our pain out in different ways. And so I think that's a really important message here as well. You know, because I think it's sometimes people don't really know. They're like, how do I remember this person? Or what do I do? So I want to go back just a little bit as to talking about this, because again, I find this really fascinating and unfortunate, of course, that your husband, that was so fast what happened with your husband. And so both Seth and your husband had brain tumors and went through this. What causes brain tumors, Angie? Like, how do we know? Is this still a mystery? Like, how do we look out for this with our loved ones? Because I love to share all of your stories on this show, but every episode we talk about a specific type of loss. So bringing awareness to it is so important. But what do we really know about brain tumors? Like, how do we prevent this? I think that might be quite a bit of the frustration in this.
Yeah. You know, I think the biggest thing is, I don't think that they know, you know, and I think it's just the research that we need to continue to do. So for example, with my brother, Seth, his tumor, they think that he may have been born with, but it was so slow ongoing, but it was very slow growing. So it did not present symptoms until he was well into his 20s, right? And so it's not necessarily genetic. It's not genetic disposition, but I believe that we are all born with cancer cells in our body. Okay, how cancer cells decide to show themselves in every human being is different for every one of us, right? And some cancer cells will remain dormant for a person's entire life, and they will never develop into a cancer. I mean, that's just science right there. But with Jack, for example, then Jack was fair skin, redhead, blue eyes. So he had every disposition for melanoma. At 21 years of age, Jack did have melanoma on his arm, like a spot, and he had it removed. And that was it. And so then 15 years later, what ignited in Jack's body was stress. So he had a lot of stress in his body from our son dying. So a year after our son died is when Jack was diagnosed with this cancer. And I've talked endlessly with doctors about this. Not all doctors agree. A lot of doctors do agree. But stress is very indicative of what happens in our bodies. And so since Jack had already had those cancer genes, the melanoma, it just erupted in his body again, I feel, from the stress. And, you know, Jack held on to a lot of that stress by being the strong one for me and Gracie and for our entire family. And I don't think he let his grief out, you know, and so he held on to it. And so that is just one of the things. So then his ignited an ocular melanoma, which is also, you know, Jack was an outdoors guy a lot. And, you know, who knows when, you know, if wearing sunglasses, would that have helped? We don't know. But he had that predisposition of having, you know, those cancer cells for melanoma. So we really have to take care of ourselves when we are grieving. For example, when we are grieving a human being, whoever that loss is, I mean, we have to do the things. We have to take care of our mental health and our physical health, doing the breathing exercises, doing, getting out in nature, taking care of our bodies, not turning to alcohol or, not turning to drugs and doing all that stuff and eating healthy, because otherwise we're going to make our bodies stressed out, and God forbid another person, develops cancer. But like I said, everybody's journey and story is different when it comes to the cancer. And, sometimes we just don't know. It could be environmental things that, develop.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting that you're able to reflect back and see, yes, my husband internalized a lot of this. And I think, we all do this as a coping when we're going through a loss or grief or pain or stress, like all of that. But I do think it's like, we talk about this on the show with any male guests that come on, like men tend to internalize a lot because there's just not as much room for them to grieve. So that's like a whole other thing too, right?
Yes.
So guys that listen to the show, like, it's okay to show your feelings and put it out there because, like you said, it manifests in our body. And I appreciate you sharing that too, that we are born with cancer. And, I think it's all fascinating, but I think it's important that we do take care of ourselves too when grieving. And I've talked about it many times as well, because I was so guilty of this. A lot of us drink or self-medicate or, become kind of addicted to just watching TV or sleeping or things like that. And yes, while sleep is important, you need to get outside, you need to breathe, you need to like move your body. And these sound like simple things, like people who have not been through significant loss might be like, what? Like, duh, we do that every day. But those are big milestones for you.
They are. They really are. Yeah. Like with the male, like, so you look at my brother too, for example. So he was doing so good with his cancer, it's like he really didn't even have cancer per se. It's like he had a brain tumor, right? Because he never had to do the hard chemo and the hard radiation stuff. But what happened? Jack died. And then what the stress of all that, I'm sure, probably ignited something in Seth's body as well.
I would imagine. I was thinking about that as you were explaining Jack's story. I'm like, well, then Seth, like right after, and I think there is something to the fact that there's a lot of internalization, and that shows like our thoughts, our feelings, all of that, like it physically manifests. It's very real, and it's a very real part of your story. And I think it's, again, a very important story to tell. And something I wanted to ask you too, as we were sitting here chatting, Angie, is, often those of us who have lost someone to cancer, and obviously here we're talking mostly about siblings, of course, but there's a lot of anticipatory grief that happens, right? Like, can you tell us a little bit about your journey with that? Because you've not only had that with Seth, but you lost your son in a very different way, very sudden. And sudden death, in my opinion, is very different than anticipatory, like when it's going to happen. But my opinion on this, and again, I like to hear this from people that have experienced both, and I think that's a lot of value that you bring to the show. So thank you so much for sharing. But I think they're both awful and they're both terrible, and it's not real till it really happens. It's just experientially a little bit different. So can you tell us kind of a little bit about that? Because with Seth, I almost feel like there was and there wasn't, because there was so much hope that he was going to be okay until kind of the last round. And then, but with your husband, probably a lot more anticipatory grief because it was stage 4, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. With Jack, so when he was diagnosed terminal. And they told us that he was going to die from this disease. We didn't know when Jack was going to die. It could have been years. It could have been days, right. Who knew? But I started grieving my husband that day. I knew our marriage together was going to end. We were never going to get that happily ever after. And
no rocking chairs on the front porch, all of that, all the classic stuff.
Yeah. And so I guess during that time period, it was just really important for me to learn as much as I could from Jack on how to be a good person. Jack was an amazing human being, and Jack was he created a community of people every second he got. So what could I learn from Jack, right? So that was what I wanted to know. I wanted to know, what can I learn from Jack to move forward in life when he is gone? How can I be a good person? How can I make this world a better place? How can I raise our daughter the way Jack envisioned us raising her? And just, that was just the biggest thing. It was extremely different than losing our son suddenly. Yes, a sudden death, and one that is like this is completely different. But it was always, we had a caring bridge site for Jack that we would let, the community know what was going on. It's so exhausting. When someone is terminal like this, you're just wondering, when's the next ball going to drop, and because we would have highs, we would have lows. I'm just in the process of finishing writing a book about our journey, and going back through all of this, it has really, I thought we had, I don't know, I didn't see a lot of happy times during that 16 months of Jack's life, and it makes me sad that I don't remember the happy times. But then I also don't remember some of the really bad times. But having it documented, we just really were surviving, and I think that's all a person can do going through anticipatory grief, is you just survive, it's coming, and you just have to do the best you can, honestly. And you have to love the people that are going to be gone.
Yeah. That's so exciting. You're writing a book. Okay, we'll have to connect again when that is out.
Yes.
But no, I think, God, such great advice, Angie. You just kind of gave me some chills, because this is something that's come up a whole lot. Talking about anticipatory grief, and, because there's so many people in the group that have that. There's so many people in the group that have sudden, and then it's kind of somewhere in the middle for people. But those are the two biggies, right? It's happening. Yep. And I love that you are so raw and open and sharing that, that's the day you start grieving, the day you get the news. And, on my show, the first episode, or my season, I should say, is the call, and everyone connects with that. It's so funny that everyone connects with that episode. It comes up every single time I talk to one of you guys. And it's because we all have our own versions. And I feel like with anticipatory grief, and as you guys are going through that process, whether, like you said, it's a week, years, months, whatever weeks, you have so many, it's a lot of front loading for you guys, right? It's like lots of calls, lots of ups, lots of downs. And then I feel like with sudden loss, there's that call or that moment where it happens. And then you kind of experience a lot of that afterwards. And what's interesting about anticipatory grief is, yes, but you're never really prepared and then it really happens, right? You think you are, you're grieving it, right? And so I think you explained that really, really well. And I think you're another person that has come on to talk about anticipatory grief and said to document, because it's not something that's really enjoyable during the time.
No.
But look at you now, you're writing a book about it. And I'm sure you're really grateful that you did document things and things are there, because when we're in the moment, I think we see things very differently than when we're reflecting back.
Yes, I'm a huge journaler. I started journaling after our son Garrett died, because when I couldn't sleep at night, I would just get up and I'd journal I'd do that until the tears stopped. And once they stopped, I'd be like, okay, I can go, even if that was just getting 2 sentences out. But yes, I have that information. And I tell you what, I could look back 6 months after Garrett died, a year after Garrett died. And I mean, those first 6 months, the journal entries were downright scary. And I was like, holy moly, who is that lady? And then I could look, I'm like, dang, Angie, you've come a long ways. Good job, and I was always so proud of myself, and this is not big monumental stuff like, oh, she's fine and happy and everything's good. It's slow, but I saw that progression. And, you have to take those little moments and know that you are healing. You don't see that. You don't think you are. A year out, you think, this is the way my life's going to be for the rest of my life. And it sounds awful. I don't want to be this person. But then you look back and you're like, I am healing.
I could not agree with you more. And I can't even imagine what your journal entries looked like right after you lost Garrett, right? I mean, that was really quite the beginning of so many losses. I know Seth had been sick and had gone through surgery, but you guys were so hopeful for him, right? So it was a different mindset, and that was sudden happened. And it's interesting that you say the healing aspect of it, because when I recorded the first season and I opened my journal that I was keeping when my brother was killed, and I read the eulogy live on the podcast, you know, I flipped through the pages and stuff, and I was like, wow, I had that thought. I'm healing. I'm moving forward. I'm not perfect. I'm nowhere near where I'll probably be in 10 years or 20 years, but I saw progression forward. And I think there's such beauty in pen to paper for that. Yeah.
I do too. Yep. I agree. Huge. I agree.
So
yes,
as we kind of wrap, Angie, tell us anything I missed that you want to share, and then also any advice that you could go back and give yourself at the beginning of all of these losses, right? Not just Seth, because what a significant loss, but if you could go back in time and kind of give yourself some advice, because I think that's really helpful to all of our listeners, and of course touch on anything that I may have missed, and we'll close out.
Well, yeah, I honestly feel, give yourself grace. You know, I feel like we as grievers, we do not give ourselves grace. We think that we aren't doing things right. We don't think we're doing them well. We don't think we're moving forward. We don't think we're healing. We think everything's wrong. And I'm just going to quickly just snake in. You know, Jack's sister, Brooke, she passed away in 2018, and she died from alcoholism. And I think that is very important with ending this, as, you know, she did not give herself grace. She thought she was a bad sister for not being there for her brother during his diagnosis, because she lived out of state. She fell into a depression. She fell into drinking is comfortable. Drinking makes me feel okay. And it was because it was numbing her, you know, her mind. And Brooke did die from alcoholism in 9 years after her brother, Jack, did. So I just honestly feel we have to give ourselves grace and know that the best we can do each morning is get up and do everything you can that day. And if you can just get up in the beginning, put on your clothes, sit on the couch, you're doing good, right? You're doing really good. And if a month later you get up and you start taking showers every other day, you're doing really good, you know? And I mean, the slow progression, but you're giving yourself grace, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be messy. It's going to be messy for a long time. So I always tell people to give yourself grace. And if you're not the griever and you're listening to this and you have the friend that's the grieving person, please give them grace. You can't fix them. You can't fix anything that they're going through. Just be there, acknowledge their grief, and just say, okay, yep, you know, and, you know, give them kudos on the back if they said, wow, I feel really good today. I took a shower, you know, say, good job, buddy. You know, you're doing great. And, but grace upon grace is what I say to everybody.
I love that. And your daughter's name is Gracie.
Gracie.
It's kind of like your thing. I love that, Angie. Oh my God. Grace upon grace. I love that. And I really, you know, we say that a lot. People are like, give yourself grace. And I'm talking about it already this season. You know, what does that mean? So thank you for defining that, because it can look different for everybody. And yeah, if it means that you just got out of bed and put a new sweatshirt on that day and and sat on the couch, like, that's cool. But it, you know, if you brush your teeth, great. Like, I mean, and I love that you're giving advice to the people that want to support us as well, because sometimes you don't know, like, you're like, God, why can't she just get it together? Why can't he just get it together? It's because this is a lot, you know, it's a lot. And you definitely understand going through multi-loss. And yes, I appreciate you talking about your sister as a sister-in-law as well, because that's a really great example. It really is. It's a really sad example. I'm so sorry you lost her, because that is someone who didn't give herself grace. You're right. And I hear this a lot too, and I'm sure you do as well, where people are like, I wish I didn't get to say this, or I was here, or I wish I did that, and there has to come a point in your healing journey. It doesn't have to be day 1, day 2, day 3, but you do have to get to a place where you forgive yourself, because that is a part of giving yourself grace. And I know that's a part of your message as well. And it doesn't mean that you're saying it, you were perfect. It just means I'm going to do better. I'm going to do better. And that's okay. And the reality is the person that you have lost, whether it's your brother or sister or whomever you've lost, or multi-lost like you, bless your heart, Angie, they're no longer physically here with us. So we have to live in honor of them. And we can either shame ourselves, and what happens is we numb. And that's what I did in the beginning too. I drank too much. I didn't want to deal with things. And now life looks totally different for me, because I decided, you know what? My brother, he forgives me. He forgives me for anything that was unsaid. He forgives me but that takes time, and it's okay to not feel that way day 1, but you will get to that place as long as you move through it and allow yourself to feel it, like you just explained so perfectly.
Yes.
Angie, where can we connect with you? Because I think a lot of people will connect with your story in the aspect of multi-loss, of course, and then all your knowledge about cancer, brain cancer, tumors, so much knowledge here. Where are you comfortable with people connecting with you?
Well, I have turned, my passion into purpose, and I've created a greeting card company called Butterflies and Halos. Butterflies are my sign from my son, Garrett, and then halos are my angels that are in heaven. And so Butterflies and Halos is basically a greeting card company. It's for friends to help friends navigate the grief journey. And, we, like I said before, we can't fix them, but if we can give our friend a card that says exactly how they feel, let's jump over the cliche with deepest sympathy. I'm so sorry for your loss. And let's get down to the nitty gritty. Like the very first card I came up with was, I don't know what to say. Let's go eat one of those damn casseroles.
I love it.
Yes. Okay. So that's what you would give your friends. So this has grown into, I have about 150 greeting cards on my website, but you can check me out at butterfliesandhalos.com. And also on social media, I'm at Butterflies and Halos. And I have all the information
that is
you
so
need there.
Cool, Angie. Awesome.
Yeah. Yes. And then if anybody listening to this wants to, I do offer a code by using podcast 15, and you can use that at checkout and get 15% off whatever
That's
your
awesome.
order is.
Okay. I'm glad I asked. Awesome. Thank you, Angie. Thank you for sharing all your loved ones with us today and for being on the show.